Wandering Echo drifted through the Kepler 442 system like a metal leaf caught in an endless cosmic wind. Her solar collectors spread wide to catch the dying light of the orange dwarf star that had become humanity's newest frontier beacon. Captain. Elena Vasquez stood before the main viewport, her weathered hands clasped behind her back, watching the dance of ice particles that spiraled around the ship's hull, remnants from the comet they'd been mining for the past 3 weeks. At 47, she had the kind of eyes that had seen too much of the galaxy's darker corners, but still held the spark of wonder that had driven her from Earth's overcrowded districts to the vast emptiness between stars. The Echo wasn't much to look at. A converted mining vessel barely 200 meters long, her hull patched with mismatched plates from a dozen different shipyards, her engine nacelles humming with the distinctive off-key harmony that only came from running fusion drives well past their recommended service life. She carried a crew of 37 souls, each one a volunteer who had signed up for the long-haul missions that took them months away from the nearest human settlement. They were miners, engineers, survey specialists, and dreamers, the kind of people who looked at empty space and saw possibility rather than void. Elena's reflection stared back at her from the viewport, superimposed over the star field like a ghost. Her olive skin bore the permanent slight tan that came from years under artificial suns, and her black hair, streaked with premature silver, was pulled back in the practical ponytail she'd worn since her academy days. The blue uniform of the Independent Mining Consortium fit her like a second skin, faded from countless wash cycles and patched at the elbows where the fabric had worn thin against command console edges. "Captain," called out Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb from the bridge behind her, his voice carrying the particular note of controlled urgency that made every spacer's spine straighten. "We've got multiple contacts on long-range sensors. Configuration unknown. But they're moving fast, and in formation." Elena turned from the viewport, her boots clicking against the metal deck plating as she crossed to the central command chair. The bridge of the Echo was cramped by military standards, but felt spacious after years of working smaller vessels. 7 stations arranged in a semicircle around the captain's position, each workstation humming with the quiet efficiency of well-maintained equipment that had been pushed to its limits and somehow kept running through sheer stubbornness and engineering pride. Webb stood at the tactical station, his tall frame bent over the sensor display. At 29, he was young for a first officer, but he'd earned his position through a combination of technical brilliance and the kind of unshakable calm that served well in the deep black. His sandy hair was regulation short, and his green eyes held the intensity of someone who treated every sensor reading as a potential threat to be analyzed and understood. "How many contacts?" Elena asked, settling into her command chair and feeling the familiar comfort of the worn padding that had molded itself to her body over countless hours of watch standing. 12 ships, Captain. Maybe more. The sensor picture keeps shifting. They're running some kind of stealth technology, but our passive arrays are picking up thermal signatures and gravitational distortions." Webb's fingers danced across his console, calling up additional data streams. "Distance is roughly 4 million kilometers and closing. Current velocity suggests they'll reach us in approximately 47 minutes. Elena felt the familiar cold weight settle in her stomach, the sensation every deep space captain learned to recognize as the moment when a routine mission suddenly became something else entirely. She'd felt it before, during the Titan station incident when pirates had tried to board a supply convoy she'd been escorting, and again when the Echo had stumbled across the derelict Generation ship in the Vega system, its hull split open like a metallic flower to reveal the mummified remains of colonists who had died centuries before humanity had learned to fold space. "Any response to standard hails?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Negative, Captain. We've been broadcasting on all frequencies since first detection. Standard identification protocols, mining claim notifications, even emergency channels. Complete radio silence from the contacts. Chief Engineer Rosa Martinez looked up from her B, stationed near the rear of the bridge, her dark eyes reflecting the glow of her status displays. At 52, she was the oldest member of the crew, a veteran of the mining fleets who had forgotten more about keeping civilian vessels running than most people ever learned. Her graying hair was tied back with the same practical efficiency that characterized everything about her, and her coveralls bore the permanent stains that marked someone who spent more time in engine rooms than anywhere else. "Captain, if we need to run, I can give you about 60% power above normal cruise," she said, her voice carrying the slight accent of her Colombian heritage. "The drives aren't rated for it, and I can't promise they'll hold together for more than a few hours, but we'll move fast enough to make anyone think twice about chasing us." Elena nodded, but her mind was already working through the tactical situation. The Echo was fast for a mining vessel, but she wasn't built for combat or extended high-speed maneuvers. Her cargo holds were full of refined metals and rare earth, elements worth millions of credits. But that same cargo would make her sluggish in any kind of evasive action. More importantly, running away meant abandoning their mining claim and the 3 months of work they'd invested in this system. "Helm, bring us to heading 27 Mark 15, half impulse," she ordered. "Put some distance between us and the asteroid field, but don't make it look like we're running scared. Ensign David Park, barely 25 and fresh out of the—" Merchant Marine Academy acknowledged the order with the crisp precision of someone still trying to prove himself worthy of his station. His black hair fell across his forehead as he bent over his controls, and his movements had the quick efficiency of youth combined with genuine talent. The Echo responded to his touch like a living thing, her bulk shifting with surprising grace as her thrusters fired in carefully calculated sequences. "Captain," Webb called out, his voice tight with concentration. "I'm getting better resolution on the contacts. They're definitely not human design. Hull configuration doesn't match anything in our databases. And Captain, they're big. The largest one is showing at least twice our mass, maybe more." The bridge fell silent, except for the quiet hum of life support and the distant throb of the fusion drives. Elena felt the weight of 37 lives pressing down on her shoulders. 37 people who had trusted her to bring them safely through another mining run, who had families waiting for them at the orbital stations around Wolf 359, who had dreams and plans that extended far beyond this moment in this empty system. She stood and walked to Webb's station, studying the sensor display over his shoulder. The contacts were indeed large, their shapes angular and aggressive in a way that spoke of military purpose rather than exploration or commerce. The formation they maintained was too precise for merchants, too coordinated for pirates, and too alien for anything in human space. "Time to the hyperspace limit?" she asked. "At current heading and speed, about 2 hours," Park replied from the helm. "But Captain, those contacts are moving faster than us. If they maintain current velocity, they'll intercept us well before we can jump." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, running through options with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through 15 years of deep space operations. The Echo carried minimal defensive systems, a few point defense lasers designed to deal with debris and micrometeorites, some basic electronic warfare capabilities, and the standard complement of emergency beacons and survival pods. Against unknown alien vessels of clearly superior size and technology, they might as well be throwing rocks. But there was something else nagging at her, a detail that didn't fit the pattern of a standard intercept or attack run. The alien formation was approaching directly, making no attempt at stealth beyond their technological advantages, following what appeared to be a standard patrol pattern. It felt less like an ambush and more like a mistake. "Webb, show me the approach vector again," she said. "Overlay it with our current position and trajectory." The tactical display shifted, showing the converging paths of the two groups. Elena studied it for a long moment, her trained eye picking out the subtle details that told the real story. The alien formation had been on their current heading for at least an hour before the echo had been detected. They weren't hunting specifically for the human vessel, but rather following a predetermined patrol route that happened to intersect with the mining ship's position. "They didn't come looking for us," she said slowly. "We're just in their way." The implications of that realization sent a chill through the bridge crew. If the aliens were conducting routine patrols in this system, it meant they considered it their territory. The Echo and her crew weren't just facing an encounter with unknown hostiles. They were trespassing in someone else's space, and that someone had the technology and firepower to enforce their territorial claims. "Captain," Webb said quietly, "passive sensors are picking up weapons signatures, high-energy plasma conduits, what looks like particle beam projectors, and something else I can't identify. Whatever these things are, they're built for war." Elena returned to her command chair, her mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. The smart play was to run, fire up the drives to maximum power, dump the cargo to increase speed, and hope they could reach the hyperspace limit before the aliens decided to do something about the uninvited guests in their system. But the smart play meant abandoning months of work, losing millions of credits in refined materials, and potentially leaving valuable intelligence about alien capabilities unrecorded. More than that, it meant running without understanding what they were running from. The aliens might be territorial but peaceful, interested in establishing communication rather than eliminating intruders. They might be scouts for a larger force, gathering intelligence on human capabilities and intentions. Or they might be something else entirely, a military patrol conducting exercises, explorers mapping previously unknown systems, or refugees fleeing from some distant conflict. "All hands, this is the captain," she announced over the ship's intercom, her voice carrying the calm authority that had been drilled into her during officer training decades ago. "We have multiple unknown contacts approaching our position. All departments, prepare for possible contact with non-human intelligence. This is not a drill, but I want everyone to remain calm and follow standard first contact protocols. We don't know their intentions, and we're going to assume they're as curious about us as we are about them." The intercom clicked off, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Elena knew that throughout the ship, her crew was probably feeling the same mixture of fear and excitement that came with the possibility of first contact. They were miners and engineers, not diplomats or xenobiologists, but they were also human beings standing at the threshold of one of the most significant moments in their species' history. "Captain," Martinez called from her station, "I'm showing some unusual energy readings from the approaching contacts. Whatever their propulsion system is, it's not generating the kind of emissions we'd expect from fusion or antimatter drives. It's cleaner, more efficient. We might be looking at technology significantly more advanced than our own." Elena nodded grimly. Advanced technology meant advanced weapons, advanced defenses, and potentially advanced intentions that human understanding might not be able to properly interpret. The history of first contact scenarios in human fiction was not encouraging, filled with misunderstandings that led to conflict, cultural differences that made communication impossible, and technological disparities that doomed the less advanced species to subjugation or extinction, but it was also filled with stories of cooperation, mutual understanding, and the expansion of knowledge that came from contact with truly alien minds. The Echo and her crew might be standing at the beginning of a new chapter in human history, the moment when the species took its first step toward true galactic citizenship. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, each sensor update bringing the alien formation closer to intercept range. Elena found herself studying the faces of her bridge crew, seeing her own mixture of fear and anticipation reflected in their expressions. Webb maintained his professional focus on the tactical displays, but she could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. Martinez continued her careful monitoring of the ship's systems, but her usual easy confidence had been replaced by the careful precision of someone preparing for the unknown. Park held the Echo steady on her course, his hands moving across the helm controls with the unconscious skill of someone who had been born to fly between the stars. At 37 minutes to intercept, everything changed. The first sign wasn't visual. It was the sudden, bone-deep vibration that ran through the Echo's hull, a harmonic resonance that made the deck plates sing like struck tuning forks. Elena felt it in her teeth, in the fillings she'd gotten as a child on Luna Colony, a frequency that seemed designed to reach into the very molecules of their ship and announce its presence with unmistakable authority. "Captain." Webb's voice cut through the strange harmonic, sharp with professional alarm. "They're scanning us, active sensors, but not like anything in our databases. The energy signature is..." "It's beautiful, Captain. Complex, layered, like they're not just looking at us, but reading us." Before Elena could respond, the main viewer flickered and changed. The star field vanished, replaced by something that made every human on the bridge draw in a sharp breath. The face that looked back at them was undeniably alien, yet hauntingly familiar in its basic symmetry. Elongated features that might have been carved from dark jade, with large eyes that held depths of intelligence and what looked disturbingly like disappointment. The being's mouth didn't move, but its voice filled the bridge with a resonance that seemed to speak directly to their minds rather than their ears. When it spoke, the words came in perfect, unaccented Standard Galactic, a language that had been developed by human linguists less than 50 years ago. "Vessel Wandering Echo, registration Epsilon 779er Delta, independent mining. Consortium, Sol Sector. You are in violation of hegemony space, restricted zone Kappa 442. Prepare to be boarded for processing and..." "Wait." The alien's large eyes narrowed, and its head tilted in a gesture that was surprisingly human-like. You are human." There was a pause that stretched for heartbeats, during which Elena could hear nothing but the quiet hum of her ship's systems and the thundering of her own pulse in her ears. The alien's expression shifted through what she could only interpret as surprise, confusion, and then something that looked remarkably like fear. "Oh, Void, take us all," the alien continued, and now there was definitely emotion in that mental voice, dismay, regret, and underneath it all, something that sounded like genuine terror. "Command, this is Patrol Leader Vexhai of the 4th. Interdiction Fleet. We have a situation. The vessel we intercepted is human. Repeat, human. Request immediate guidance and..." "Oh, ancestors preserve us. They're probably recording this." Elena found her voice, though it took more effort than she cared to admit. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the independent mining vessel, Wandering Echo. We were not aware this system was claimed territory. We've been conducting legal mining operations under consortium charter and are prepared to negotiate compensation for any territorial violations." The alien, Vexhai, made a sound that the universal translator rendered as something between a sigh and a low growl. "Captain Vasquez, I am Patrol Leader Vexhai of the Kethar Hegemony. Under normal circumstances, your vessel would be impounded, your cargo seized, and your crew processed for violation of sovereign space. However..." The pause stretched again, and Vexhai's eyes seemed to look through the screen directly at Elena. "You are human. That complicates things considerably." "I don't understand," Elena said, though a cold suspicion was beginning to form in the back of her mind. "What does our species have to do with territorial violations?" Webb leaned closer to his console, his voice barely above a whisper. "Captain, I'm reading massive changes in their formation. They're backing off. All 12 vessels are reducing speed and increasing distance from us." Vexhai must have heard him, because the alien's expression shifted to what Elena was learning. to recognize as resignation. Your officer is correct, Captain. My fleet is withdrawing to what we hope is a safe distance. You see, the Kethar hegemony has been monitoring human space for approximately 47 of your standard years. We have extensive files on your species. Files? Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Oh yes, Captain. Very extensive files. Would you like to know what the first entry says? Vexhai didn't wait for an answer. Human Starship Enterprise encounters unknown probe. Probe attempts to destroy human vessel. Humans destroy probe with improvised weapons. The second entry. Human colony ship Mayflower discovers ancient alien artifact. Artifact attempts to possess human crew. Humans destroy artifact and establish colony on planet containing 17 different types of deadly predators. Shall I continue? Elena felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. There are more entries? Oh, Captain, there are so many more entries. Human exploration vessel encounters energy beings of pure thought. Energy beings attempt to enslave human crew for entertainment. Humans, well, you can probably guess what happens next. Or how about this one? Human mining operation discovers dormant alien artificial intelligence. AI awakens and attempts to assimilate human technology. Humans corrupt AI programming and turn it into Galaxy's first digital comedian. The bridge of the Echo was silent, except for the quiet hum of systems, and what Elena was beginning to realize was the sound of suppressed laughter from Chief Martinez. Webb was staring at his sensor display with the expression of someone trying to process information that didn't quite fit into any of his preconceived categories. I'm beginning to understand your concern, Elena said carefully. But surely you realize that not every human encounter results in extreme outcomes. Vexhai's laugh was a sound like wind chimes made of crystal. Oh, Captain, but they do. Every single documented case of humans encountering superior alien technology, hostile alien intelligence, or seemingly impossible odds has resulted in the same outcome. The aliens lose. Sometimes they lose so completely that their species never recovers. Sometimes they lose in ways that fundamentally alter their understanding of reality itself. That's, Elena began, then stopped. Because when she thought about it, when she really considered the history of human space exploration, Vexhai wasn't entirely wrong. Humanity had a peculiar talent for finding trouble among the stars, and an even more peculiar talent for surviving that trouble in ways that left their opponents wondering what the hell had just happened to them. The technical term in our language translates roughly to cosmic harbingers of disproportionate response, Vexhai continued. Though our xenopsychologists prefer the more clinical species exhibiting dangerous levels of adaptive creativity when faced with existential threats. We've been very, very careful to avoid any direct contact with human vessels. But you intercepted us, Elena pointed out. Yes, and that was our mistake. You see, Captain, your ship's emission signature doesn't match our database of human vessels. The Wandering Echo was constructed using primarily Centaurian hull plating, Proximan fusion drives, and Tau Cetian sensor arrays. To our long-range sensors, you appeared to be a hybrid vessel of known friendly species conducting routine operations in what we thought was unclaimed space. Webb looked up from his console. Captain, our mining claim was filed through the Centaurian Mining Guild rather than Earth directly. It probably shows up in their databases as a Centaurian operation. Elena was beginning to see the full scope of what had happened. So you thought you were intercepting a routine mining vessel from a known peaceful species? Exactly. Standard procedure for territorial violations by friendly races is polite but firm interdiction, followed by negotiation and compensation. We expected to have a brief diplomatic conversation, collect a modest fine, and send you on your way with a warning to check territorial claims more carefully in the future. But instead you found humans. Instead we found humans, Vexhai confirmed, and the resignation in his voice was palpable. And now we have a problem. because according to our protocols, the proper response to discovering humans in hegemony, space is to immediately withdraw to a minimum safe distance of 10 astronomical units and request guidance from our high command. Elena frowned. 10 astronomical units? That's the distance from Sol to Saturn. Yes. Our xenobiologists determined that was the minimum distance required to avoid accidental provocation of defensive responses in human crews. We've learned to be very careful about what constitutes provocation where your species is concerned. From somewhere behind Elena, Chief Martinez finally gave up trying to contain her laughter. It started as a quiet chuckle, but quickly built into the kind of full-body mirth that comes from stress and absurdity combining in perfect proportion. Within moments, half the bridge crew was fighting to maintain professional composure, while the other half had given up entirely. "This is insane," Elena said, though she found herself fighting a smile. "You're telling me that your entire species is afraid of humans because we have a reputation for—" "What exactly?" "For winning," Vexahai said simply. "For finding ways to survive situations that should be impossible to survive, and for doing it in ways that our best strategic analysts still can't fully explain. Captain, are you familiar with the Xerion incident?" Elena searched her memory. "Vaguely. It was about 15 years ago, wasn't it? A human survey ship encountered some kind of energy phenomenon?" The survey ship Lewis and Clark discovered what appeared to be a natural subspace anomaly generating exotic particles useful for faster-than-light communication. The anomaly turned out to be a massive artificial intelligence that had been dormant for approximately 10 million years. When the human survey team's scanning activated it, the AI decided that all organic life in the galaxy was a contamination that needed to be eliminated. Elena felt her amusement fading rapidly. "I remember now. The official report said the anomaly destabilized and collapsed harmlessly. The official report is somewhat simplified. What actually happened is that the AI began converting matter throughout the local stellar group into computational substrate, planning to use the resulting processing power to construct a galaxy-spanning network of elimination machines. It had consumed approximately 40% of the Xerion system, and was beginning work on neighboring stars when the human crew managed to establish communication. And they convinced it that organic life was actually the galaxy's immune system, and that eliminating organic life would leave the galaxy vulnerable to infection by, and I quote from the official transcript, universe-eating space viruses. From the next dimension over, Elena stared at the screen. They convinced a 10-million-year-old superintelligence that space viruses were a threat? Not only did they convince it, Captain, they provided detailed technical specifications for the hypothetical space viruses, complete with defensive strategies, and a comprehensive plan for galaxy-wide immune system optimization. The AI spent approximately 3 days analyzing their data before concluding that organic life was indeed essential for galactic security. It then converted all of its computational substrate back into normal matter, politely thanked the human crew for bringing the space virus threat to its attention, and went back to sleep. The bridge was silent again, but this time it was the silence of people trying to process information that seemed to exist in direct violation of everything they understood about logic, diplomacy, and the basic nature of reality. The technical specifications were completely fictional, of course, Vexahai continued. Our analysis indicates that the human crew made up everything on the spot, using a combination of theoretical xenobiology, speculative physics, and what appeared to be plot elements from several dozen science fiction novels. And it worked, Elena said weakly. It worked. A 10-million-year-old artificial intelligence capable of converting stars into computronium was defeated by what essentially amounted to an elaborate practical joke. Our xenopsychologists still don't understand how. Chief Martinez had stopped laughing, but Elena could see her shoulders shaking with the effort of maintaining professional composure. Webb was studying his tactical display with the expression of someone trying to reconcile objective reality with information that seemed to exist in direct violation of objective reality. There are other incidents, Vexhai continued. The Altair, 7 colony that convinced a hive-mind parasite species to become accountants. The cargo hauler that defeated an entire void cult armada by broadcasting episodes of something called The Three Stooges on all frequencies until the cultists died. Of laughter. The diplomat who ended a 300-year interstellar war by introducing both sides to a card game called poker. Those can't all be real, Elena protested. They are all documented, Captain, verified by multiple independent sources, and they represent perhaps 5% of the total incidents in our files. Elena found herself thinking of her crew, 37 ordinary people who had signed up for a routine mining operation and were now apparently serving as representatives of a species with a galaxy-wide reputation for solving problems in ways that defied all reasonable analysis. She thought of Webb with his technical expertise and unshakable calm, of Martinez with her practical engineering knowledge and earthy sense of humor, of young Park with his precise ship handling and eager professionalism. "So what happens now?" she asked. Vexhai's expression shifted to something that looked like hope mixed with profound nervousness. "Now, Captain, I wait for instructions from my high command while maintaining a respectful distance and hoping very much that you don't. Decide to get creative about your current situation." Creative? The last human vessel that was interdicted for territorial violations ended up accidentally discovering a method for turning subspace itself into a propulsion medium, revolutionizing faster-than-light travel for 16 different species, and somehow managing to make the interdicting government rich in the process. Our economists still can't explain how that worked either. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of expectation and reputation settling around her like a mantle she had never asked to wear. When she opened them again, she found Vexhai watching her with the expression of someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Patrol Leader Vexhai," she said carefully, "I can assure you that the crew of the Wandering Echo has no intention of getting creative. We're simple miners who made an honest mistake about territorial boundaries. We're prepared to pay reasonable compensation for any violations and leave your space immediately." "Ah," Vexhai said, and Elena didn't like the tone of that single syllable. "About that, Captain, we seem to have another problem." Elena felt her stomach drop in a way that had nothing to do with artificial gravity. In her experience, when aliens who were already afraid of humans mentioned another problem, it usually meant the situation was about to become exponentially more complicated. "What kind of problem?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Vexhai's expression shifted through several configurations that Elena was beginning to recognize as the alien equivalent of someone trying to find diplomatic ways to deliver catastrophically bad news. "Captain, when my fleet was dispatched to intercept what we believed was a routine territorial violation, we were not alone in our response." Webb's head snapped up from his sensor display, his face pale. "Captain, I'm detecting additional contacts. Long-range sensors show, Jesus Christ on a pogo stick, there are a lot of them." "Language, Lieutenant Commander," Elena said automatically, then immediately felt foolish for correcting profanity at a moment like this. "How many is a lot?" "At least 40 vessels, Captain. Maybe 60. They're coming in from multiple vectors, and these signatures are different from Vexhai's fleet. Bigger, much bigger." Vexhai made a sound that the universal translator rendered as something between a groan and what Elena suspected might be alien profanity. "Those would be the Void Hunters, Captain. They were conducting military exercises in the next system over when we reported the territorial violation. Standard protocol called for notification of all hegemony forces in the sector." "Void Hunters," Elena repeated, not liking the sound of it. "Let me guess, they're not as diplomatically inclined as your patrol fleet?" "The Void Hunters are, how do you humans say it, specialists. They handle situations that require more direct solutions. When we reported that we had interdicted a territorial violator, they assumed standard enforcement protocols would apply, which are: disable the intruding vessel, secure the crew, impound the cargo, and process everything according to hegemony law. The Void Hunters have considerable experience in this area, and their ships are specifically designed for enforcement actions against potentially hostile vessels. Elena was beginning to see where this was going, and she didn't like it one bit. But now you've discovered we're human. Yes, and I have been trying to contact the Void Hunter commander to explain the situation, but they are maintaining communication silence as per standard tactical doctrine. They will not break silence until they are in position to begin enforcement. Actions. How long? Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer would be insufficient. Webb answered from his station. At their current approach speed, the lead elements will be in weapons range in approximately 22 minutes. Captain, some of these ships are showing mass readings equivalent to heavy cruisers. We're talking about vessels that could probably vaporize us without slowing down. Chief Martinez looked up from her engineering station, her expression grim. Captain, I can give you everything the drives have, but even at maximum burn, we're not going to outrun military vessels designed for enforcement actions. We might be able to reach the hyperspace limit before the smaller ships catch us, but those heavy cruisers will be in range long before that. Elena stood and began pacing the small area behind her command chair, her mind racing through options and discarding them almost as quickly as she could think of them. Running wasn't viable. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and outpositioned. Fighting was even less viable since the Echo had all the military capability of an angry fruit basket. Surrender might work, except that it sounded like the Void Hunters weren't in a mood to listen to explanations. Vex High, she said, turning back to the main viewer. What exactly happens when the Void Hunters discover they're dealing with humans instead of routine territorial violators? The aliens' silence stretched long enough that Elena began to wonder if the communication link had been severed. Finally, Vex High spoke, and his mental voice carried a weight of resignation that seemed to press down on the bridge like a physical presence. Captain, the Void Hunters they are not like my patrol fleet. They are warriors bred and trained for combat operations. They have never encountered humans directly, but they have heard the same reports we all have. When they discover what they are facing— What? Elena demanded. They will panic, Captain. And when Void Hunters panic, they tend to solve problems by applying overwhelming firepower until the problems cease to exist. The bridge fell silent, except for the quiet hum of life support systems and the increasingly urgent beeping of proximity. Alarms as more and more contacts appeared on their sensors. Elena found herself thinking about the 37 people under her command, people who had trusted her to bring them safely through what should have been a routine mining operation. She thought about their families, waiting for them at stations, and colonies throughout human space. She thought about the cargo holds full of refined metals that represented months of dangerous work in the deep black. Most of all, she thought about the growing reputation that humanity apparently carried among the stars, a reputation that seemed to be based equal parts on miraculous problem-solving and sheer, bloody-minded refusal to accept impossible situations. Captain, Webb said quietly, I'm picking up communications traffic between the approaching fleets. It's heavily encrypted, but our computers are getting fragments. The translations are concerning. How concerning. Phrases like extreme prejudice protocols and sterilization pattern gamma are showing up a lot. Elena felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. The approaching Void Hunters weren't just planning to disable and board the Echo, they were planning to eliminate what they saw as a potential threat before it could demonstrate the kind of dangerous creativity that had made humans legendary throughout this part of the galaxy. There has to be something we can do, she said, though she was beginning to suspect that their options were limited to variations on creative dying. Vex High, is there any way to establish communication with the Void Hunter commander? not without breaking their tactical silence, and attempting to force communication might be interpreted as a hostile act. Captain, I am truly sorry about this situation. My patrol was never supposed to encounter humans, and our protocols for this scenario are inadequate. Elena stopped pacing and stared at the main viewer, studying Vex High's alien features for some clue about what she was missing. There was something in the way he spoke, something in his carefully diplomatic language that suggested he wasn't telling her everything. Vex High, she said slowly, what aren't you telling me? The alien's large eyes seemed to focus on something beyond the screen, and when he spoke again, his mental voice carried a note of what Elena was learning to recognize as fear mixed with a peculiar kind of hope. Captain, there is one possibility, but it would require you to do something that goes against every principle of reasonable spacefaring behavior. At this point, reasonable spacefaring behavior seems to have gone out the airlock, Elena said. What did you have in mind? The Void Hunters are expecting to encounter either routine territorial violators or humans who will respond to their approach with typical human creativity. What they are not expecting is a human vessel that deliberately chooses to do something completely unprecedented in the historical record, such as surrender immediately and unconditionally without any attempt at negotiation, resistance, or creative problem-solving. Elena blinked. You want us to give up? I want you to do something that no human crew in recorded history has ever done. When faced with superior alien forces, I want you to act in a way that is so completely contrary to human nature that it will confuse the Void Hunters long enough for cooler heads to prevail. That's... Elena began, then stopped, because when she thought about it, when she really considered the reputation that humanity had apparently earned among the stars, Vex High's suggestion made a twisted kind of sense. Every recorded human encounter with alien threats had involved some form of resistance, whether through violence, cunning, or sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. A human crew that simply gave up without a fight would be so unprecedented that it might actually work, but it would also mean surrendering 37 lives to aliens who were reportedly planning to apply sterilization pattern gamma to the problem of human creativity. There's just one small issue with that plan, Elena said. If I understand correctly, the Void Hunters are planning to kill us all anyway. Ah, Vex High said, and for the first time since the conversation began, he sounded almost hopeful. But that is where the genius of the plan lies, Captain. You see, the Void Hunters' protocols for dealing with humans are based entirely on historical precedent. Every recorded human encounter has involved some form of resistance or creative response. Their tactical doctrine assumes that humans will fight, or run, or attempt some form of improvised solution. But if you surrender immediately and unconditionally, you will be doing something that has literally never happened before in the history of human-alien contact. The Void Hunters will have no protocols for dealing with cooperative humans. Their entire tactical doctrine will become irrelevant. Elena felt a strange mixture of hope and profound skepticism warring in her chest. And then what? They'll just let us go? Then, Captain, they will be forced to fall back on standard hegemony law for dealing with territorial violations by cooperative alien species, which, as I mentioned earlier, involves polite diplomatic conversation followed by modest fines and warnings about checking territorial claims more carefully. The bridge was silent as Elena's crew processed this information. Webb was staring at his tactical display with the expression of someone trying to reconcile the concept of surrender with everything he had ever learned about military tactics. Martinez was shaking her head slowly, though Elena couldn't tell if it was in disbelief or reluctant admiration. Park was gripping his helm controls with white knuckles, clearly fighting every instinct that told him to prepare for evasive maneuvers. There's still one problem, Elena said slowly. Even if your theory is correct, even if surrendering immediately will confuse them long enough to prevent an attack, we're still talking about placing 37 human lives in the hands of aliens, who are specifically trained to deal with hostile situations through the application of overwhelming force. Yes, Vex High agreed. That is indeed a problem. But Captain, consider the alternative. If you attempt to run, you will be destroyed before you can reach the hyperspace limit. If you attempt to fight, you will be destroyed even more quickly. If you attempt any form of creative solution, you will validate every fear the Void Hunters have about human unpredictability, and they will respond accordingly. Elena closed her eyes and tried to think like a captain instead of like a human, being who had been raised on stories of brave resistance against impossible odds. When she opened them again, she found her entire bridge crew looking at her with the expression of people waiting for her to pull a miracle out of the vacuum of space. "There's something else," she said to Vex High. "Something you mentioned earlier that doesn't quite fit. You said the Void Hunters have never encountered humans directly, but they've heard all the same reports you have." "That is correct." "But those reports? They're not exactly terrifying, are they?" "I mean, yes. Humans tend to find unconventional solutions to impossible problems, but we also tend to find solutions that work out well for everyone involved. The AI that got convinced about space viruses went back to sleep peacefully. The hive mind parasites became productive members of Galactic society. Even the Void Cult Armada just laughed themselves to death. They weren't massacred." Vex High was quiet for a long moment. "Captain, you are correct that human solutions tend to be surprisingly beneficial for all parties involved. But from the perspective of military commanders who value predictability and control, that almost makes it worse. An enemy who will destroy you is something you can understand and plan for. An enemy who will defeat you in ways that somehow leave you better off than you were before is unsettling." Elena found herself smiling despite the gravity of their situation. "So the Void Hunters aren't afraid that we'll destroy them. They're afraid that we'll help them. In ways they cannot predict or control, yes. And for warriors who have built their entire identity around understanding and controlling the application of force, that is perhaps the most terrifying possibility of all." Suddenly, Elena understood. The approaching alien fleet wasn't just responding to a territorial violation. They were responding to what they perceived as an existential threat to their worldview, their culture, and their entire understanding of how conflicts were supposed to work. "Captain," Webb called out, his voice tight with urgency. "Multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. I count at least 15 additional vessels, and they're big. Really big. These signatures match heavy battleships." Vex High's expression shifted to something that Elena was certain was alien terror. "Oh, void and chaos. They've called in the Dreadnought fleet." "The what now?" Elena demanded. "Captain, the Dreadnought fleet is... They are our final response. Protocol for Class 7 existential threats. They were not supposed to arrive for another 6 hours, but it appears that someone has expedited their deployment." Elena looked around her bridge, at her crew of 37 ordinary people who had somehow become the focal point of what appeared to be an entire alien civilization's deepest fears about the unpredictable nature of human problem-solving. "Well," she said, and was surprised to hear herself laughing. "I think we may have just discovered what happens when humans get a reputation for being too helpful." What happened next would later be recorded in the Kethar hegemony's military archives as the incident that proved human unpredictability extends to strategic surrender, though most beings who reviewed the classified files simply referred to it as the day the Dreadnought fleet discovered philosophy. Elena stood at the center of her bridge, surrounded by the controlled chaos of a crew trying to process the impossible situation they'd found themselves in. Outside the Echo's viewports, space was beginning to fill with alien vessels, sleek patrol ships, angular enforcement cruisers, and now the massive, predatory shapes of what could only be the dreadnoughts that had apparently been dispatched to deal with a single human mining vessel. "Captain," Webb reported, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Total contact count is now... Jesus, it's over 100 ships. They're forming a complete tactical sphere around our position. Even if we could somehow disable half of them, the other half would still have enough firepower to crack a moon." Elena looked at the tactical display, watching as formation markers appeared and disappeared in complex patterns that spoke of military coordination on a scale that dwarfed anything in human experience. Each ship represented hundreds or thousands of alien lives, all focused on the problem of what to do with 37 humans who had accidentally wandered into the wrong star system. "The irony is beautiful, in a terrifying sort of way," she murmured. "We're facing the largest military response in probably galactic history, and all because we have a reputation for being too good at helping people." Chief Martinez looked up from her station, where she'd been monitoring the increasingly desperate attempts of the Echo's systems to catalog and analyze the alien fleet surrounding them. "Captain, I've been thinking about what Vexhai said. About surrender being something humans have never done. And? Well, he's not wrong. I can't think of a single recorded case of a human crew in deep space just giving up. Even when we're completely outgunned, we always try something. Hell, even the Titanic crew kept working until the ship went down." "The Titanic was a wet Navy vessel from centuries ago," Elena pointed out. "Same principle applies, Captain. We're stubborn to the point of stupidity, and apparently that's made us famous across half the galaxy." Elena turned back to the main viewer, where Vexhai was watching her with an expression that somehow managed to convey both hope and terror in equal measure. Behind him, she could see what appeared to be other aliens moving urgently around what looked like a military command center. "Vexhai," she said, "I need you to be absolutely clear about something. If we surrender unconditionally right now, what exactly happens to my crew?" "Captain, under standard hegemony law, territorial violators who surrender peacefully are processed according to their species' diplomatic status. Since humans have no formal diplomatic relations with the hegemony, you would be classified as, well, as what your people would call undocumented aliens. And undocumented aliens are treated how? They are held in comfortable detention while their status is reviewed, their cases are evaluated by diplomatic specialists, and arrangements are made for their safe return to their home space. The process typically takes between 2 and 6 months, depending on the complexity of the case." Elena blinked. "You're telling me that if we surrender, we'll be held in what amounts to alien immigration detention for a few months, while bureaucrats figure out what to do with us?" "Essentially, yes. Though I should mention that hegemony detention facilities are quite pleasant by most standards. Full environmental control, recreational facilities, educational opportunities, and meals prepared, according to each species' dietary requirements." Webb made a sound that might have been laughter or hysteria. "Captain, we're being threatened with comfortable imprisonment and 3 square meals a day." "It gets better," Elena said, feeling the cosmic absurdity of the situation settling around her like a warm blanket. "Vexhai, what happens to our ship and cargo?" "The vessel would be impounded pending resolution of your case. The cargo would be evaluated and, if determined to have been legally extracted, would be held in trust until your release. Any territorial violation fines would be deducted from the cargo's value, with the remainder returned to you. So we'd actually get paid for our mining operation, minus a fine for trespassing." "Correct, Captain." Elena looked around her bridge at the faces of her crew. Martinez was openly grinning now, her weathered features creased with the kind of amusement that came from recognizing the universe's twisted sense of humor. Webb was shaking his head slowly, though Elena could see him fighting a smile. Park was staring at his helm controls with the expression of someone trying to reconcile the concept of profitable surrender with everything he'd been taught about spacefaring pride. "There's just one small problem with this plan," Elena said. How exactly do we convince 100 alien warships that we're surrendering peacefully when they're expecting us to do something creatively destructive? Ah, Vexhai said, and Elena was learning to distrust that particular syllable. That is where the situation becomes delicate. You see, Captain, the Void Hunters and the Dreadnought Fleet are currently operating under what we call anticipatory engagement protocols, which means they are authorized to open fire the moment you do anything that could be interpreted as typically human behavior. Elena felt her brief moment of optimism evaporating. And what, exactly, constitutes typically human behavior? Well, attempting to flee would be considered typically human. Attempting to fight would definitely be typically human. Attempting to negotiate or bargain would be somewhat typically human. Broadcasting messages or attempting to establish communication would be very typically human. What about just sitting here doing nothing? Suspicious preparation for typically human behavior. Elena stared at the screen. You're telling me that no matter what we do, they'll interpret it as a prelude to us doing something typically human? Captain, you must understand, my people have 47 years of documentation proving that humans always do something. The very concept of humans who simply exist without actively solving problems or creating unexpected outcomes it does not fit our understanding of your species. Chief Martinez leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Captain, I think I see the issue. We're not just dealing with a military response. We're dealing with an entire alien civilization that has built their understanding of humans around the idea that we never give up. So if we give up, we shatter their entire conceptual framework for understanding human behavior, which, from their perspective, might be the most dangerously human thing we could possibly do. Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of cosmic irony pressing down on her shoulders. When she opened them again, she found herself looking at the tactical display, at the hundreds of alien vessels that had been deployed to contain 37 humans who had stumbled into the wrong star system by accident. There has to be a way, she said. Some method of surrender that doesn't involve doing anything that could be interpreted as creative problem-solving. Captain, Webb said quietly, I've been monitoring their communications. The encryption is breaking down under the load of coordinating this many ships, and our computers are getting more translation fragments. They're arguing among themselves. About what? About whether we've already done something typically human by not doing anything yet. Half the fleet commanders think we're planning something diabolical, and the other half think the fact that we haven't started planning. Something diabolical yet is itself part of some incredibly sophisticated human strategy. Vexhai's expression shifted to what Elena was beginning to recognize as profound alien embarrassment. Captain, I am afraid that our response to your presence has escalated beyond what anyone intended. The arrival of the Dreadnought Fleet has created a situation where any action or inaction on your part will be interpreted through the lens of our expectations about human behavior. So we're trapped by your assumptions about us. Effectively, yes. And those assumptions are now being reinforced by the fact that you have not yet attempted to escape, which several fleet commanders are interpreting as evidence that you have already devised some sort of escape plan so sophisticated that it doesn't require any visible preparation. Elena found herself laughing again, though this time it carried a note of hysteria that she didn't entirely like. We're being threatened by an entire alien fleet because they think we're too smart to try to escape. The technical term being used in fleet communications translates as meta-tactical deception through apparent tactical passivity, Vexhai confirmed. Our strategists are convinced that your apparent surrender is itself a form of psychological warfare designed to make us lower our guard. What if it wasn't apparent surrender? Elena asked suddenly. What if it was actual surrender, but conducted in a way that was so obviously genuine that even paranoid alien military commanders couldn't interpret it as tactical deception? Webb looked up from his station. Captain, what did you have in mind, Elena? turned to face her crew, seeing in their faces the same mixture of fear, determination, and desperate hope that she felt in her own chest. These were good people, competent people, who had trusted her to keep them alive in the deep black between the stars. They deserved better than to die because an alien civilization had developed an irrational fear of human helpfulness. "We're going to surrender," she announced. "But we're going to surrender in the most unhuman way possible. We're going to surrender boring." "Boring?" Martinez asked. "Boring," Elena confirmed. "No dramatic gestures, no inspiring speeches, no clever tactics or creative solutions. We're going to fill out the proper paperwork, follow all the correct procedures, and surrender with all the excitement and unpredictability of a tax audit." The bridge fell silent as her crew processed this information. Elena could see them turning the idea over in their minds, examining it from every angle, looking for the flaws that would doom them all to whatever fate awaited humans who tried to be creative in alien space. "It might work," Webb said slowly. "If we approach it like a purely administrative process, if we remove all emotion and spontaneity from the interaction, we become the antithesis of everything they expect from humans," Martinez finished. "Captain, that's either brilliant or completely insane." "At this point, I'll take either one," Elena said. She turned back to the main viewer, where Vexhai was watching her with the expression of someone waiting for the other shoe to drop, or possibly for the entire shoe store to explode. "Vexhai," she said, "I need you to transmit the official hegemony forms for territorial violation surrender. All of them, including any supplementary documentation, addendums, or procedural requirements." The alien's large eyes widened. "Captain, there are quite a lot of forms. The complete documentation package for territorial violation. Surrender contains approximately 473 separate documents. Perfect. The more bureaucratic, the better. But, Captain, many of these forms require information about species classification, diplomatic status, trade agreements, cultural exchange protocols. Humans have none of these things established with the hegemony." Elena smiled, and it was the kind of smile that had once made a particularly stubborn asteroid yield 3 months' worth of platinum ore when everyone else had said it was economically unviable. "Then we'll fill out the forms to request those things be established. I assume there are forms for that too?" Vexhai was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his mental voice carried a note of what Elena was learning to recognize as alien awe mixed with terror. "Captain, you want to surrender to a military fleet of over 100 warships by filing paperwork?" "Not just filing paperwork," Elena corrected. "Filing it correctly, completely, and in triplicate." The silence that followed was broken only by Chief Martinez's quiet laughter, which quickly spread to include the rest of the bridge crew. Elena found herself grinning as she realized that she was about to attempt something that was not only unprecedented in human history, but possibly in the history of galactic civilization itself. She was going to save her ship and crew through the strategic application of bureaucracy. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she couldn't help but think that this was exactly the sort of thing that was going to end up in the aliens' files as yet another example of humans solving impossible problems in ways that defied all reasonable analysis.